They called him loyal for 70 years, until the truth detonated after the master's death.
From a distance, the house looked serene. Up close, it was a machine built to own lives.
Jacob was the shadow in every room, quiet, useful, and underestimated by design.
He perfected devotion like armor, because loyalty was the only cover he was allowed to wear.
Jacob learned the first rule of survival: listen and remember everything they assume you cannot. He was born into bondage, old enough to feel fear, too young to name it. In silence, Jacob made a vow. If he couldn't be free, he would make them pay in truth. They trusted him with keys, never imagining keys can open doors for revenge too.
They praised him as the good one, a label meant to isolate him from everyone else.
Jacob mastered the second rule: be so invisible and they speak sins in front of you. His first secret wasn't a confession, it was a ledger, proving cruelty can be written like business.
He copied everything at night: names, dates, signatures, because evidence outlives fear.
He built an archive under the floor, one page at a time, like laying a trap in silence.
Patience kept him alive, but every year of waiting asked for another piece of his soul.
He watched a friend disappear down the road and learned revenge must be bigger than grief.
The house hid its crimes in polite letters. Jacob learned to read what the ink avoided saying. With keys, he found contracts, receipts, and names, proof that cruelty was planned, not accidental. They trusted metal and locks, never considering the servant who heard the combination every week.
He never stole originals. He copied them, leaving no absence that could trigger suspicion. The third rule was simple: smile, so they mistake your patience for acceptance.
Years passed, and the secrets multiplied, each one another thread in Jacob's hidden web.
They placed the heir in his arms, never realizing the safest hands can also be the sharpest. The boy grew into the master. Jacob stayed the same, because his plan required time. Jacob discovered weakness, habits, and fears the master hid behind wealth and reputation. Money left footprints. Jacob followed them, because greed always writes down its own confession.
When law arrived at the door, the master smiled. Jacob watched who the law truly served.
Jacob learned the system, friends judging friends, so justice became something you had to build yourself.
By then, the box was heavy, because cruelty isn't rare, it's repetitive. People asked why Jacob stayed, because leaving alone felt like surrendering everyone still trapped inside.
Time finally touched the master. Wealth could buy silence, but not immortality.
When the will was drafted, Jacob listened, because endings are when secrets leak. The heir waited for power. Jacob waited for a moment the heir could not control. Jacob set a countdown, 30 days after death, when arrogance would be at its loudest.
At the funeral, they mourned loudly. Jacob stood quietly, already planning the second burial, reputations. He served their drinks like always, because the best disguise is routine.
The heir celebrated too soon. Power makes people careless, and careless people leave fingerprints. Jacob prepared letters, each one a match, each address a place reputations could burn. He sent copies to many doors, because one gatekeeper can be bribed, but not an entire network.
By day 10, the first whisper appeared. Small, uncertain, but impossible to unsay.
By day 20, whispers became questions, and questions are what power fears most.
The heir heard rumors and raged, because he thought control was inherited like land.
He suspected Jacob,
because the loyal servant is the only one who sees everything.
Jacob didn't flinch, because fear was a luxury he stopped owning decades ago.
On day 30, the right package opened, and the quiet war became public. Ink hit paper, and the master's family learned the truth has its own kind of violence.
The town reacted like a body struck. First denial, then rage, then the sickening recognition of complicity. Officials could ignore rumors, but not documents with signatures, dates, and their own names nearby.
The heir searched for the leak. Never understanding the leak was decades of listening, not one mistake. The heir found an empty floorboard because Jacob's final move was removing the last proof.
Jacob walked away at dawn, without shouting, without pleading, because the work was already done. They tried to stop him, but stopping Jacob wouldn't stop the papers already moving through the world.
The family name cracked, not from enemies outside, but from the servant they trained to be invisible. Investigators arrived, because once ink spreads, power must pretend it cares.
He denied everything, because admitting truth would cost him the only thing he ever valued: status.
But documents don't argue. They simply speak, and their language is names, dates, and proof. The house went quiet, because fear finally moved upstairs and refused to leave.
They asked where Jacob was, as if the architect of their downfall owed them an explanation.
Jacob took a new name, because the first freedom is choosing what you are called. The archive didn't vanish. It changed hands, ensuring the truth could not be buried with one man. He left one message: truth is slow, but it arrives when you build its road. The heir tried burning papers, forgetting Jacob had already made the most important copies. A town can forget pain, but not headlines, not signatures, not stories repeated in daylight.
The house stood alone, because when reputation dies, even neighbors keep their distance.
Jacob lived quietly, because revenge wasn't about spectacle. It was about ending their immunity.
The loyal servant wasn't loyal. He was an architect, building a collapse one document at a time. He waited 30 days, because grief fades fast, and arrogance returns even faster. Jacob's lesson was simple: listen, cop, wait, and strike with truth when they can't stop it.
This isn't a fairy tale. Truth doesn't heal everything, but it ends the lie that power is untouchable.
Jacob looked back once, then turned away, because the past had finally lost its grip.
The house still stood, but its power was gone, replaced by records that would not disappear. The journal closes, because some stories don't end in justice, only in exposure.
The strongest revenge isn't blood. It's truth arriving where lies once felt safe. They thought he was harmless, until the day his silence finally spoke. Subscribe for more stories where the powerless outthink the powerful without ever raising their voice.
Comment below, would you run for freedom or stay to build a truth that can't be buried?
By morning, the papers had traveled farther than any confession, and the town woke up with nowhere to hide.
Each porch became a courtroom, and every whispered line turned into a verdict no one could unread.
The heir moved fast, not to face the truth, but to outrun it before it reached the banks. He hired a man who could turn cruelty into contracts and call it order with a straight face.
They stopped fighting the evidence and started hunting Jacob, because fear is easier than accountability.
Jacob had learned a hard rule: leave before the trap is built, and never sleep twice in certainty. In hiding, every habit becomes danger, so discipline replaces comfort, and silence becomes a shield. He separated the copies like lifeboats, because one boat sinking should never end the journey.
The exchange happened under him and sunlight, because the safest shadow is the one nobody notices.
The heir offered money like mercy, betting that a paper's hunger would beat its courage.
For a moment, the editor balanced profit against consequence, until fear of exposure became heavier than greed.
Then another envelope arrived from miles away, proving the story had already learned to survive.
Once the paper spoke, witnesses followed, because truth feels safer when you're not alone.
Investigators traced names and signatures, and the scandal spread outward like ink dropped into water.
His allies vanished, not from virtue, but from instinct, because scandal is contagious to cowards.
The field still worked, but the master's confidence cracked, and even routine began to feel watched.
Behind closed doors, they tried to trade favors for forgetting, as if memory could be negotiated.
But the documents traveled by rail, and outside town, the heir's influence turned thin.
Years later, in 1890, the box surfaced again, and the past returned wearing fresh headlines. In a city newsroom, a young editor reopened the archive, and every page felt like a fuse.
When the lid lifted, dust rose like a warning, and the room seemed to hold its breath.
With the box open, one reporter began linking names, dates, and places, and the pattern tightened like a noose.
By dawn, the heir's name was printed again, and distance could no longer protect him from memory.
But the hardest truth to confirm was Jacob himself, because he built his life to leave no tracks. A church registry offered a clue, an alias, a date, and a town that didn't ask questions.
The reporter followed the lead north, because a man like Jacob would choose distance over attention.
In that town, the trail felt warm for the first time, like it had been waiting to be noticed.
He didn't knock, because exposing Jacob now would only punish the one man who tried to protect others.
So he wrote the story carefully, enough truth to matter, but not enough detail to get Jacob hunted again. The city reacted the way cities do, half shocked, half numb. But everyone understood what the papers implied. Privately, the heir didn't argue innocence. He calculated damage, because reputation was the only thing he truly owned. Old friends stepped back, because loyalty disappears the moment it becomes expensive to keep.
The legal machine moved slowly, but the evidence didn't need speed, only survival and a place to be seen. Every copy made the story harder to bury, and that was Jacob's real design from the beginning.
First came access, quiet entry into rooms where power stored its sins, assuming nobody below could read them.
Then patience, copying by inches, not miles, because rushing is how a careful plan becomes a confession. Finally, redundancy, because truth only becomes permanent when it exists in more than one place.
30 days wasn't superstition, it was strategy, letting guards relax while the evidence quietly learned to travel.
He tried a new title and new letterhead, but paper trails remember the hand that signed them first. The sharpest punishment wasn't a cell. It was being left alone with everyone finally believing what he was.
Jacob's final entry didn't boast. It simply stopped, like a man who knew when to disappear.
The pages showed proof, but also silence. The parts fear forced him to leave between the lines. A folded map revealed secret places, not for treasure, but for staying alive when the world turns hostile. He locked the box away, because evidence should outlive every generation that tries to ignore it. Soon, the story reached strangers, and strangers began asking the questions local power feared most. And the deeper they looked, the clearer it became. Fairfield wasn't alone. He was one thread in a larger web.
Jacob didn't win wealth, he won dignity, and forced powerful men to live with consequences they couldn't whip away.
Once the door is opened by truth, it never closes the same way again, even if it still clicks shut.
access, patience, backup, Jacob turned survival into a method, and method into a story that couldn't be erased.
In 1890, the lesson remained simple. Power depends on silence, and silence breaks when proof is shared.
They called him loyal until his silence became testimony, and testimony became the one thing money couldn't buy.
If this story held your attention, tap like so it reaches others who still believe truth never surfaces. Subscribe for more stories where the quietest people become the most dangerous, simply by keeping records. Comment below. Would you survive by staying silent, or by collecting proof until silence becomes impossible?
Paper remembers without emotion, and that is why it terrifies people who depend on forgetting. Every line typed is a refusal to look away, and a promise that the archive will stay fed. Rain can wash streets clean, but it cannot wash a record away once the record has been copied. A letter is a quiet weapon, because once it leaves your hands, it starts living its own life. The world moves forward, but the past rides along, waiting for a headline to reopen it. Rivers carry people away, and sometimes they carry stories back, if someone is willing to listen.
Justice often arrives late, but documentation arrives on time, if someone had the courage to keep it.
Memory lives in hands that refuse to let evidence disappear, even when the world wants comfort.
Some heroes stay unnamed, not from shame, but from wisdom learned in the hardest places. Ink spreads like consequences, slow at first, then everywhere, and finally impossible to deny. Archives are where power goes to pretend it never happened, and where truth waits to be reopened. Keys don't just open doors, they open access to what people hide, and Jacob understood that first. Distance doesn't erase the past. It only changes how it follows you, and how quietly it returns.
One flame can outlast a room of shadows, and one record can outlast a lifetime of lies.
Once the story becomes tomorrow's paper, it becomes everyone's property, and control slips away.
And that is the real ending. Proof preserved, power exposed, and a quiet man still choosing safety over applause.
If you want more stories like this, stay with us, because history is never finished, only filed.
Watch the next episode, and notice the pattern, because the same machinery wears different faces in every era.
Good night, and remember, the smallest act of recording can become the loudest act of resistance.
The city lights kept burning, but a single archive box had changed what people dared to say aloud. Somewhere, another envelope was already traveling, because truth never asks permission once it learns the route. And the heir learned the last rule of power. When you fall alone, and fast. The box remained locked, but its contents were already free, moving from hand to hand without chains. A simple church book started the trail, reminding us that small records can carry enormous weight.
The rails kept humming, like a reminder that stories travel, even when the people inside them do not. Someone tied the pages together again, because scattered truth is fragile, but organized truth is durable. Even when headlines blur with time, the record underneath stays sharp, waiting for the next reader.
In 1890, they called it history, but to the people harmed by it, it was still present tense.
And somewhere, a quiet survivor kept living, proof that staying alive can be its own form of victory.
The lock was only for the box. The story itself had already slipped free and learned to multiply.
The newsstand closed for the night, but the questions stayed open, because that's what truth does.
The newsroom went quiet, but the archive stayed awake, holding the kind of silence that speaks. Years would pass again, but the record would remain, because permanence is what copies are built for. The map stayed folded, but its message was clear. Survival is planned, not hoped for, in secret.
And that is where we leave it. Truth secured, names protected, and the lesson carried forward by strangers.
If you believe unity is strength, subscribe and tell us, would you survive by silence or by proof that cannot die?